Rev up your engines! All right, the question people always ask me, if I'm going to buy a hybrid car, can I fix it myself? How can I find out what's wrong? Well, I'm going to give you the truth today. Of course, they're hybrid cars. A big electric generator and motor. In orange is high voltage electricity, hundreds of volts. Well, Scotty knows how to work on them, but I've been doing this stuff for 53 years. You got a gasoline engine, has 4 spark plugs, has oil, has an oil filter, and air filter. Yes, they have regenerating brake systems, but they also have a normal one. Same brake pads as any other car. As to the regenerative braking, when you slow down, it regenerates electricity. So it turns a lot of kinetic energy you spinning down the road into electricity instead of heat. Your brakes turn it just into heat, it wastes it. So even though this car has normal brakes too, guess what? They can last sometimes a couple 100,000 miles because a lot of that energy of motion when you're going 60 is turned into electricity, not heat on the brakes. So they last a long time, but when they do wear out, you can easily fix them yourself. And the owner of this car, he changes his own spark plugs and stuff. There's still a lot of maintenance you can do yourself, but unless you're willing to buy $200 gloves and liners and replace them probably 3 or 4 times a year, and buy expensive meters like this Fluke meter and spend thousands in tools, and trust yourself to work with hundreds of volts, my advice is leave the hybrid system alone. Other than its cooling system, it has a cooling system too, which you want to change the coolant. Toyota, so they do it like every 7 years or 100-something thousand miles. There's not really anything you can do to the hybrid system. This Toyota's been making these Priuses for over 20 years. They got the best hybrid system out there. There's no arguing that for long life and how it works. The only thing you got to worry about is the big hybrid battery. And if you get a rebuilt one, they might last a year or two. They're just old batteries that are checked and the bad cells are replaced, but the other cells remain. So you got a 15-year-old battery. Maybe you replace 20, 30, even 50% of the cells. The old ones are still old, 15 years old. It's not going to last as long. That's the main kicker of these. Realize a true battery costs a fortune if it does go out. But the rest of the car, like I say, normal disc brakes in the back. It's got headlights, bulbs, just like any other car. So there are a lot of things you can do yourself, but here's one warning. Don't mess with the air conditioning system either, because this has an electric compressor. Use special oil, special tools that are only used for these. You can't mix the two. You use the wrong type of oil, it can short the whole system out. Don't mess with the air conditioning system either unless you're a professional mechanic with a lot of experience and a lot of tools, and 2 separate AC systems, one for these and one for the other ones. Now this one was purchased used for $7,000. The guy likes using it for Uber and for delivering stuff. Now it does have 165,000 miles on it, and he bought it with 110,000 miles. And it was okay for a while, but he keeps getting this misfire, and nobody can seem to figure out why it's misfiring. He tried the plugs, the coils. It didn't make any difference. So first thing we're going to do is hook it up to the scan tool. Don't even think about doing in-depth analysis unless you have a fancy machine like this on a Prius. Here we go. They know what it is, a Prius 2011. Always start with the basic stuff when you're analyzing a car. You don't want to end up changing the engine like I've seen people do, only to find out all you needed was the $35 wiring harness that goes to the fuel injector. Start with the basic stuff. So there's an awful lot of basic stuff, as you can see. Now here we go. There's a lot of green, but there's some red. So let's look at the computer first. It's got cylinder number 1 misfire, cylinder number 3. The coolant temperature circuit has a low input. Engine coolant pump is over revolution. Cylinder 1, cylinder 3. And the cam crank. The main things we're going to worry about here is 1 and 3 misfire. We'll be looking at this data system. There's 181 points we can analyze. Here we go on a road trip. We're going to record it. All right, we're done with the road test. Let's check out the data. Check the cylinder compression test. Here's how it's done if you want to read it all. And it turns out that cylinder number 3 has lower compression than the others. Obviously a problem there. Now there was also a little bit misfiring cylinder 1, so let's take a look at the design of this thing. Firing order is 1, 3, 4, 2. So often if you get a misfire in 1, it will affect the previous or the cylinder that's after it firing 2, because it messes up the whole thing in a row. The main misfire is number 3. 1 had a few misfires, but the 3 had almost all of them. I would definitely figure this thing is starting to blow the head gasket at number 3. Kind of a known problem for these engines. Now this thing is burning through coolant, which makes sense. He said every time he fills this thing up, he's got to use like 2 quarts of coolant to refill it. It's not leaking anywhere. it's obviously burning, which is kind of bizarre, because I tell people the real problem about buying a hybrid car is the electrical portion. In this case, it's the gasoline engine that's got a problem, but realize it's a special gasoline engine. It's an Atkinson cycle. Hardly anybody knows how to work on those things. And unfortunately, being a hybrid engine, Atkinson cycle that hardly anybody works on, a $3,000 labor job, and you pray the head isn't cracked or warped. So, you know, you're looking at a minimum anywhere between $3,500 and $5,000. It is not a cheap job. Now, the owner's been through all kinds of stuff. A dealer said, well, we'll put a used engine in for $7,000 with a year guarantee. We'll do a head gasket for $5,000 with no guarantee at all. You're kind of stuck between a rock and a hard place. He's going to try the bar sealer because on the graphic information that I recorded, it only misfired at lower speeds. And you notice when I started it up, kind of shook. That's because coolant was in that cylinder because it's been sitting here while I was analyzing it. When it leaks, it gets in the cylinder and blah, blah, then it burns and makes it shake. And he doesn't like to shake it. Well, at high speeds, it's working. So this thing's got a tiny leak. And sometimes, hey, I found that bar sealer that they sell at the auto parts store can actually seal these things for years. So let's pray it works for him, because if it doesn't, he knows he's stuck between a rock and a hard place. But if the only thing it's doing is burning coolant and it runs fine on a highway otherwise, it's got to be a pretty small leak, because when you pressure test it, it doesn't show any leaks. Even a head gasket, if it's really blown badly when you pressure it up, you're going to get some leakage in the pressure. It might work. Let's pray that it works for him. Otherwise, he's looking at a ton of money to fix it right. Of course, he'd have to pay more money than he paid for the car. It'd be $7,000 plus change, and they give a 30-day guarantee. Let's pray the sealer works. So here we go. I've been using this stuff for years. If this works, it'll be the best $32 he ever spent. Well, it used coolant from St. Louis to Clarksville, so we're going to put the sealer in. So let's say a little prayer and we'll see what happens when he gets back to St. Louis. And here's some bonus questions and answers. Now, here's a company I fully agree with. Honda, I believe they have the right idea about electric vehicles. Now, they say they're committed to make all electric vehicles. But they said it's going to take time. They said it's going to take a full 19 years to swap over. I kind of agree with that time frame. Might even be longer. Everybody knows it's expensive to swap over to a battery system. They test stuff out a long time before they sell it to the public. Take their fuel injection system. Honda, when they made their first fuel-injected cars, they sold them in Great Britain. It was one of their tests. They had them there for years before they made it to the United States. We were still driving carbureted Hondas when the English were driving fuel-injected. So what did they do? They got all the bugs out in jolly old England, which is a small market. Then when they came to the United States, you know what kind of fuel injection problems Hondas had? They didn't have hardly any, because they tested it out. So smart move by Honda, if you ask me. They can wait to see which battery system works. Maybe it won't be batteries. Maybe it'll be hydrogen fuel cell electric cars. Maybe it'll be ammonia fuel cell electric cars. Nobody knows yet. 19 years from now, the chips will have fallen a lot better than they have already. The chips are still flying up in the air now. They're not even close to the ground. And if you have been watching the news, following me, Honda signed a deal with GM to jointly develop electric SUVs, and supposedly they're going to debut in 2024. So if you look at Honda, for years the only truck they sold was just a rebadged Isuzu. Now they make good trucks themselves. Like they say, only fools rush in where wise men stand and analyze the situation. So I think Honda's a smart company and they're doing the right thing. Hey, they're going to sell lots of cars already that have gasoline motors and hybrids. They say it's going to be 19 years before this. That's the real thing. It reminds me when I got involved with these guys in Houston that's starting up a website, right? The guy who sold the idea to the investor said, oh yeah, you know, we're going to do this real fast, make some money. And then they hired a guy as the CFO, right? And he told them the truth about websites. He says, it's going to be 4 or 5 years before you make any money in it. Well, the next meeting, that guy was gone. Because they didn't like what he said, the truth, that it was going to be 4 or 5 years before they made money. The guys didn't even last a year and they went bankrupt. So, you know, you got to have a long-term strategy if you really want to survive in the business world, especially in the car world. Heinz Doofenshmirtz says, is Nissan changing its ways? I wanted to know about a 2022 Pathfinder because they ditched the CVT in favor of a ZF transmission. What do you think? Okay, yes, I'm not a Nissan fan. Some of their better vehicles like that, the ZF transmissions are excellent transmissions. The ZF transmission transmission is proven, it probably would be a lot better than the other ones. That's the thing you got to understand about Nissans. Their rear-wheel drive vehicles are actually pretty good. All the Z cars were rear-wheel drive, and they were excellent. It's their front-wheel drive crappers that aren't any good, and those don't have the problems that the crappy Jacko front-wheel drive transmissions do. It's a wiser choice. So if you never want to miss another one of my new car repair videos, remember to ring that bell.